"The gentleman can wait in the parking lot with the rest of the spectators," Austin Harrington said, and he did not look at Curtis Dabney when he said it, which was its own kind of dismissal, the raised hand simply erased from the air before the crowd had finished seeing it go up. Before Curtis takes a single step on the course, he opens a canvas roll and reads one card, and no one watching knows the numbers on it were written before most of them were born. Harrington had his back to the low morning sun, and his voice pitched for the camera crew crouched by the rope wall, a boom mic dressed in a gray sock swaying above him like something alive. "Folks, for the board's benefit and for the folks watching this reel later tonight, let's be clear about what we're offering. $5,000, cash, out of Harrington Performance Systems' own marketing budget to any civilian who clears the Corrigan Ridge obstacle course in under 60 seconds. Official post record, standing for going on 4 decades now, is 58 seconds, set by a soldier nobody bothered to write down. No civilian has ever finished this course clean. Not one." He let that sit, working the room the way a good auctioneer works a room, and then he turned, finally, toward the man with his hand still half raised near the fence line. "And I do appreciate enthusiasm, but this is a serious demonstration for a serious board vote at 5 o'clock this afternoon, a $2.3 million decision about whether this post keeps running soldiers through 40-year-old mud and rope or upgrades to something that can actually measure what a body's doing. I don't think we need the gentleman who wandered in from the parking lot adding a variable we can't account for." A ripple of laughter went through the assembled platoon, easy and unmalicious, the kind that costs nothing because no one thinks anyone is being hurt by it. Curtis Dabney lowered his hand without any particular hurry. The way a man closes a door, he wasn't in a rush to walk through anyway. If you've ever watched someone underestimate a slow walk before they'd seen what it was carrying, you already know where this is going. He did not raise his hand again. He simply began walking toward the check-in table, unhurried, one shoulder held a half-inch higher than the other, in a way that made his whole gait look like it was being negotiated rather than performed. A soldier near the folding table, a corporal with a clipboard, glanced up and then glanced at Harrington as if to ask permission for a man to exist in this line. "Sir, this is an open challenge, so technically," the corporal started, "technically it's open to anyone who signs the waiver and doesn't need an ambulance standing by," Harrington said, not unkindly, already turning back toward the camera, already rehearsing the next line about telemetry and legacy infrastructure. "Let him sign if he wants to sign. We'll get some good B-roll out of it either way." The number 58 seconds hung over the field like a flag nobody had lowered in 40 years, and $2.3 million sat somewhere in a folder on a folding table nobody at the fence line had bothered to read, and $5,000 waited in an envelope Harrington kept patting against his own leg like a man checking that his wallet was still there. Behind all 3 of those numbers, unremarked, a canvas roll sat under one arm, its numbered compartments closed, waiting for a hand that had not opened it in front of strangers in a very long time. Curtis reached the table, took the pen someone offered him, and signed his name in the unhurried, economical hand of a man who had signed a great many forms in his life, and long ago stopped needing to think about where the letters went. Whatever else the morning held, it had begun the way most mornings had begun for Curtis Dabney these past several years, with someone deciding, out loud and for an audience, exactly what he was worth before they had watched him do anything at all. The jacket did most of the talking before he did. Quilted, faded past any color that had a name, feed store issue from some agricultural supply catalog decades gone, buttoned over a collared shirt closed to the throat despite the morning's mild heat, as if the man inside it had made peace with being warm rather than risk being cold later. His boots were resoled at least once, maybe twice, the stitching along the left toe a slightly different thread than the right. Nothing about him asked to be looked at, and that, more than anything, was what made the corporal glance twice. He signed the waiver with his right hand, and it was the left arm that told the story, if a person cared to read it. It hung a little forward of where an arm ought to hang, the shoulder fixed at some angle that would not climb past the height of his own collarbone, so that when he reached for the clipboard, he did not lift the arm so much as rotate his whole torso to bring the hand into range, an economy of motion so practiced it looked less like compensation and more like design. He did this once, for the pen, and did not do it again. Whatever that shoulder cost him to move, he had long since learned to spend the debt only when the debt was owed. Under his right arm, close against the ribs the way a man carries something he does not intend to set down on a folding table among strangers, was a canvas roll the length of a forearm, its surface soft with age, closed by a leather tie, gone dark and glossy with handling. Numbers were stitched faintly along one edge in a hand different from the maker's, small enough that no one at the table noticed them, though a version of this notation, sewn into cloth instead of printed on paper, matched nothing in the world Harrington's rig had ever measured. He did not open the roll at the table. He waited until he had stepped away from the crowd, found a patch of ground near the first obstacle where no one happened to be watching him just then, and untied the leather cord with 2 fingers that worked better than the rest of that hand's neighbors, drawing out a single index card from the 3rd numbered compartment. He read it the way another man might check a weather report before deciding on a coat, eyes moving down 2 columns of figures in fading pencil, and then a 3rd column beside them in a different ink altogether. A rounder hand, corrections and additions made by someone who was clearly not the man doing the reading now. He had done this at a kitchen table once, decades before this field existed in its current shape, papers spread under a hanging bulb, while Twyla checked his arithmetic with a stub of pencil and a patience he had never once managed to feel about his own math. "You've got the grade backwards on the beam," she'd said, not looking up, sliding the paper back to him with her correction already written in, and he had taken it without argument, because in 51 years of marriage, he had learned that her numbers were usually the ones that lasted. He slid the card back into its compartment now, retied the leather cord, and walked toward the starting line the way a man walks toward a door he has opened before, in a house he still, in some fashion, considers his own. Harrington was good, and it would be dishonest to say otherwise, whatever else the morning went on to prove about him. 20 minutes before the crowd thickened around the challenge line, he had a young private named Tovar running the course under his rig's sensors, a harness of accelerometers strapped across the hips and one ankle, feeding numbers to a printed run sheet clipped to a board Harrington carried instead of any screen. Tovar cleared the wall, fumbled the rope traverse, and came in at 66 seconds looking annoyed with himself, and it was Harrington, not either of the 2 coaches standing nearby with their arms crossed, who caught the actual problem. "Right hip's not firing before the left plant," Harrington said, tapping the printed sheet with 2 fingers, reading the number aloud once, then again, as if daring it to change. "You're loading off your lumbar to compensate, which is why you're slow into the crawl and not on the wall like everybody assumes. It's not your grip. It's 4 inches lower than everybody's been coaching." He had Tovar do a slow bodyweight drill right there. Hip drive isolated, and the private's second unofficial pass through that section, "Sensors still live," showed the correction holding. The coaches exchanged a look that had some respect folded into it, and one of them wrote something down. Whatever else Austin Harrington was selling that morning, some of it, at least, was real. It was in the glow of that small, proven competence that he turned back toward Curtis, and the tone he took on was the tone of a man who has just been right about something and is feeling generous with the surplus. "You'll need a medical release to run, technically," he said, loud enough for the nearest half-dozen soldiers to hear, "given, you know, the circumstances." He didn't finish the sentence, let the shoulder and the jacket finish it for him, and a private near the rope wall laughed before catching himself. "ID too," said the corporal from the check-in table, trotting over with something between duty and mischief on his face. "Insurance thing. Gotta prove you're who you say you are before we let you break a hip on federal property." Curtis produced a wallet from an inside pocket, unhurried, and held out a driver's license that the corporal barely glanced at before handing back, satisfied with having asked. A soldier near the low crawl, young enough that his uniform still creased like it had come out of plastic that morning, reached toward the canvas roll under Curtis's arm with the easy over-familiarity of someone trying to be helpful in front of his friends. "Let me hold that for you, sir, so you don't drop it climbing the wall," he said, already half smiling at the soldier next to him, and there was another ripple of laughter, warmer than cruel but laughter all the same, the sound of a crowd that has already decided how a story ends before it starts. Curtis looked at the offered hand for a moment, then at the roll under his own arm, and said nothing at all, which was its own kind of answer, delivered the way a man declines a chair he does not need. He simply adjusted the tie on the roll one half-turn tighter and kept walking toward the first marker, and the young soldier's hand hung in the air a beat too long before he pulled it back. uncertain now of what exactly had just happened, though nothing had happened that he could have named. Curtis walked the perimeter of the course before he asked to run it, and that, more than the jacket or the shoulder or the roll, was the thing Private First Class Noah Rainey noticed first. She had grown up on a stretch of Kentucky land with more working dogs than furniture, and she knew the particular posture of something reading ground rather than simply crossing it, the way her father's border collies used to stand at a gate for 3 full seconds before ever committing a paw, weighing footing and wind and the mood of the animals on the other side. Curtis moved along the outer fence line the same way, pausing at the rope wall, tilting his head a degree toward the flag on the watchtower, crouching once near the low crawl to press 2 fingers into the mud and read something there that the rest of the assembled soldiers would never have thought to ask the ground. She had her stopwatch out before she'd decided to have it out, thumb resting on the button, some old instinct from the kennel runs at home telling her that whatever was about to happen deserved a real number attached to it, whether or not anyone believed the number when she gave it to them. "That wall's leaning about 4 degrees off true," Curtis said, to no one in particular, though the 2 soldiers nearest him heard it, and one of them laughed before he'd finished deciding whether it was a joke. "It's concrete set, sir," the soldier said. "Been standing since before I was born." "Concrete moves," Curtis said. "Ground under it moves more." He didn't argue the point further, didn't raise his voice or repeat himself, just tucked the observation away the way a man tucks away a fact he expects to be proven right about eventually, and walked on toward the balance beam, reading its grain the way another man might read a face. The soldier who'd laughed went and got a level from the maintenance shed on a dare from his buddy, more for the entertainment of it than any real doubt, and came back 15 minutes later looking like he'd rather not have found what he found. 4.2 degrees, he announced, holding the little bubble tool aloft like evidence in a trial nobody official was running, and the laughter that had greeted Curtis's remark curdled into something quieter. A handful of soldiers exchanging looks that hadn't existed among them 5 minutes earlier. Harrington, 20 yards off, recalibrating a sensor strap on his own wrist, heard the number and filed it without much interest, the way a man files a coincidence he hasn't yet decided is worth being wrong about. Rainey kept her stopwatch in her palm, thumb still resting on the button, and watched Curtis approach the starting line with the same unhurried attention he'd given the wall, the beam, the crawl, the windsock hanging limp, and then, for one instant, lifting 3 inches on a gust. Nobody else on the field seemed to register at all. He watched that gust the way a man watches an old friend arrive fashionably late, and something in his stance settled, weight distributing itself back onto his heels, breath slowing to some private 4 count only he was keeping. "You gonna time him?" the soldier with the level asked Rainey, not quite mocking now, more curious than anything, the wall's 4.2 degrees still sitting uneasily in his chest. "Somebody should," she said, and left it there, because she didn't yet have a better reason than the one her father's dogs had taught her, without either of them ever calling it a lesson, that the ones who read ground before they touched it were usually the ones worth watching once they did. Curtis reached into the canvas roll one last time, drew the 3rd card, read it for the span of 4 breaths, and slid it back into its compartment without explanation. Then he set the roll down at the edge of the starting line, gently, the way a man sets down something he expects to pick back up in under a minute, and took his position. The whistle went, and what followed was not a sprint so much as a sequence, each motion arriving in its place like a part fitted into a machine built to exact tolerance. Curtis came off the line at a pace that looked, for the first 3 strides, almost leisurely, weight rolling heel to toe with no wasted lift, and he reached the rope wall already reading its 4-degree lean, angling his approach 2 feet left of where the chalk line suggested, so that the wall's own tilt helped carry his weight up rather than fighting it. He did not haul himself over so much as let the lean deliver him, the bad shoulder never once required to bear a load it could not spend, the good arm and both legs doing work the shoulder had learned decades ago to delegate. He dropped into the low crawl and did not hurry through the mud, because hurrying through mud is how a man loses time rather than gains it, and instead he moved along the driest ridge his fingers had found on the perimeter walk, elbows finding purchase where the ground held rather than where it gave. He came up on the far side with almost nothing on his sleeves. The balance beam he crossed at a pace that would have looked to an untrained eye like caution, but was in fact the precise speed at which aged, sun-warped wood gives least beneath a foot's arrival, a number he had clearly worked out long before anyone watching had been born to see him work it out. He read the beam's grain with his feet the way he'd read it with his eyes 20 minutes earlier, and the wood did not so much as creak. The rope traverse he took hand over hand in a rhythm so even it looked rehearsed, though no one there had ever seen him rehearse it. Each grip released a fraction of a second before the next one closed, the fixed shoulder rotating his torso rather than reaching, spending its one currency exactly where the traverse demanded and nowhere else. He came off the rope net at a dead run, the tunnel crawl swallowing him whole for 3 seconds, and he emerged on the other side already reaching for the final wall. Rainie's thumb came down on the stopwatch the instant his boot crossed the painted finish line, and she stared at the number for a full second before she said anything at all, because the number did not seem to belong to the man she'd just watched cross it. 41 seconds, she said, and said it again, louder, because the first time nobody quite believed she'd said it right. Harrington was already moving toward his rig, pulling the printed run sheet off its clip, reading his own sensor feed with the particular urgency of a man checking whether the world still made the sense it had made 5 minutes earlier. He read the number once under his breath. Then he read it again, out loud this time, as if a second reading might return it to a figure he recognized. 41, he said. That rig is malfunctioning. That has to be a rig malfunction. He said it to no one, and everyone, tapping the run sheet twice with 2 fingers as if the numbers might rearrange themselves under enough pressure, and around him the crowd that had been laughing 20 minutes earlier had gone entirely uncomfortably quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight and takes up space in a way easy laughter never does. No one there yet knew that 41 seconds was a number that already existed, written years before in pencil on a card now resting, retied and undisturbed, in a canvas roll at the edge of a starting line that had just, for the first time in decades, been crossed by the man who first decided how fast a soldier ought to be able to cross it. Command Sergeant Major Rowan Ainsworth arrived at the field at 11:40, 3 hours ahead of a 5 o'clock board vote he had no intention of missing, and he was still 40 yards off when he stopped walking entirely, the way a man stops when the ground in front of him has suddenly become more important than wherever he was headed. He had not seen Curtis Dabney in 11 years, not since his own retirement ceremony, and he had not served under him in 39, since the mountains, since a night river crossing that had gone wrong in a way Ainsworth had spent 4 decades declining to describe in any detail to anyone who asked. He was 58 now, gray at the temples in the particular way of men who carry rank easily, and for a long moment he simply stood at the edge of the crowd and looked at the old man in the feed store jacket the way a person looks at a photograph they didn't expect to find in a drawer they were cleaning out for some other reason entirely. Then he crossed the field, and the soldiers nearest him parted without quite understanding why they were parting, some old animal sense reading rank before insignia had time to register. He reached Curtis, and did not salute, and did not say anything for a moment that stretched long enough for Harrington to glance up from his run sheet and wonder what he was witnessing. Ainsworth reached into his own jacket and drew out a small folding knife, its bone handle gone smooth and dark with 39 years of a pocket's worth of handling, and he held it out on his open palm rather than pressing it into Curtis's hand, the way a man returns something he has borrowed for longer than he ever meant to. "You gave me this the night you pulled me out of the Tullamore," he said. "Told me a man ought to carry something sharp enough to cut a line and dull enough not to cut himself. I've carried it every day since." He set it down, finally, on the flat of Curtis's open palm and stepped back half a pace, as though the object needed room now to be looked at properly by both of them. Whatever the crowd had been prepared to feel about 41 seconds, this asked something different of them, and they gave it, the field falling into a silence that had nothing performative left in it at all. It might have stayed that silence, warm and settled, if a young captain hadn't chosen that exact moment to walk up with a folder under her arm, looking for Ainsworth specifically, needing his signature on the 5 o'clock agenda before the board convened. "Sergeant Major, if you've got a minute, the Harrington Performance Systems packet's confirmed for the vote," she said, holding the folder open, and something in Ainsworth's face changed as his eyes moved down the page, landing on a clause near the bottom that used the words unsalvageable legacy infrastructure with the flat confidence of language written to survive an audit, rather than to be read by anyone who cared. "This says there's no verified design baseline for the course," Ainsworth said, slower now. "No archived standard. That right?" "That's the finding, sir. Original design logs not in the digital archive. Contractor pulled the shelf inventory from the paper records 11 years back when they scanned everything. Whatever was there, either it got scanned wrong or it never made the cut." She said this the way people say things they have read but not yet understood the weight of, and it was Harrington, drifting closer with his own folder under his arm, who filled in the rest without meaning to. "That's actually the crux of our whole recommendation," Harrington said, some of the showman gone out of his voice now, replaced by something more careful. "No verifiable historical baseline means the course can't be certified against any documented standard, which means from a data integrity position, it's—" He stopped, looking at Curtis, at the roll under his arm, doing arithmetic that had nothing to do with kinesiology, "which means it's unsalvageable, on paper. There's a supply shed on the northeast corner slated for demolition Thursday," the captain said, checking her folder again, apologetic now without knowing quite why. "Decommissioned records overflow. It's on the same authorization as the board packet. Same signature block, actually." She turned the folder around so Ainsworth could see it, and watched his face do something she had no framework for reading. Curtis said nothing. He closed his hand slowly around the knife Ainsworth had returned to him, and looked toward the northeast corner of the post, where a low gray building sat waiting for Thursday with the patient indifference of something that had already been forgotten twice. It was Harrington who broke first, and it happened over his own numbers, which was the particular indignity of it. He'd gone back to his rig at a folding table 20 feet from where Ainsworth stood, ostensibly to prepare a formal dispute of Rainey's stopwatch time, and instead found himself scrolling backward through the sensor log, past Curtis's run, past Tovar's, hunting for whatever fault might explain a reading he still didn't want to believe. What he found instead was a clean, unbroken telemetry stream, hip angle, stride cadence, grip release timing on the rope traverse, all of it consistent, all of it plausible, none of it showing the kind of spike or dropout that would indicate malfunction. "Run it again," he said to his own assistant, a soldier on loan for the day, and she ran it again. And the number came back 41.03 seconds, the same number to 2 decimal places it had returned the first time. "Sir, the rig's not broken," she said, not unkindly. "It's just telling you something you didn't expect it to tell you." Harrington stared at the printed sheet for a long moment, reading the number a third time, silently this time, and something in his shoulders came down half an inch, the posture of a man setting a weight he had been carrying without noticing its size. His entire recommendation had rested on the course being unmeasurable by modern standards, obsolete by definition, incapable of producing a verifiable time, and his own instruments, the ones he trusted more than any human eye, had just proven the opposite in the plainest language they had. The problem had never been that the course couldn't be measured. The problem was that no one currently employed had known what number they were looking for until an old man in a feed store jacket walked onto it and gave them one. Ainsworth, 20 feet away, was having a quieter version of the same reckoning. He had taken the demolition order from the captain's folder and was reading it properly now, not skimming for his own name the way he'd first read it, and there, in the authorization block near the bottom, dated 11 years back, was a signature he recognized because it was his own. Captain R. Ainsworth, Logistics, approving disposal of decommissioned records overflow, Northeast Supply Annex, pending digitization completion. He had been a young officer signing what a contractor's inventory sheet told him was surplus paper, trusting a checklist he had no reason then to distrust, and it had never once occurred to him in 11 years to ask what particular paper had been on that shelf. "I signed this," he said, mostly to himself, and then, louder, to no one who could fix it for him. "I signed the order that authorized clearing that shed." He looked at Curtis, who had not moved. who was watching him with the patient, unsurprised expression of a man who has spent a long life learning that most harm gets done by people who never meant it, filling out forms they believed were doing good. "Curtis, I didn't know what was on that shelf. I swear to you I didn't know." "I know you didn't," Curtis said. And that was all he said. 3 words carrying more absolution in them than a longer sentence could have managed, and Ainsworth stood there holding a folder that had just told him he was, without ever intending it, the man who had nearly finished what a records contractor started. Somewhere behind them, Harrington folded his printed run sheet along its center crease, once, carefully, the way a man folds something he intends to keep rather than throw away, and looked toward the northeast corner of the post, with an expression that had none of the morning's showmanship left in it at all. The shed had no elevator and no ramp, only a flight of 11 concrete steps worn shallow in the middle from 40 years of boots, and Curtis stood at the bottom of them for a long moment, one hand on the rail, doing the arithmetic his knee had already done for him without asking permission. "I'm not climbing that today," he said, flat, no apology in it, a man reporting a fact rather than confessing a failure. "You two will have to be my knees." Rainey went up first, Ainsworth behind her, and the shed's overhead light buzzed twice before committing to stay lit, throwing a weak yellow wash over shelving units stacked with the particular chaos of a place things get sent to be forgotten rather than kept. Boxes labeled in marker, gone soft with age. A filing cabinet missing 2 drawers. A crate of steel tent stakes nobody had needed since a war that had ended before Rainey was born. They worked the shelves in a grid, Ainsworth calling out box labels, Rainey checking contents, both of them aware of the clock without either saying its number aloud, until Rainey's hand found, wedged behind a crate of surplus canteens, a ledger bound in cloth the color of a paper bag left out in weather, its spine cracked soft from opening. She carried it down into better light and opened it on a workbench, and the first page held a list of names in 2 different hands, a firm, economical hand that could only be Curtis's, and beside each name, in a rounder script, a date and a short note. Wrote to PFC Hollis's mother, March. Wrote to Corporal Tate's widow, June. Checked on the Ferris boy, discharged, doing better. Page after page of it, a private accounting of men Curtis had served with, kept faithfully long after any of them had stopped being under his command, in a hand that was clearly not entirely his own. Tucked into the ledger's back cover, folded twice, was a thin sheet of carbon paper gone the color of weak tea, and on it, in the same firm, economical hand as the names, a design log. Grades, wind allowances, footing notations for 11 obstacles, and at the bottom, a certifying time. Qualifying standard, first run, S/Sergeant C. Dabney, 41 seconds. Rainey brought both down the steps herself, cradling them the way she might have carried something that could still bite if handled wrong, and set them in front of Curtis without a word. He looked at the ledger first, not the log, running 2 working fingers along a margin where a correction had been made in that same rounder hand. A wind figure adjusted upward by 2 degrees, dated in a year Curtis recognized without needing to check it against anything. Every card in the roll had a second set of numbers in different ink, in her hand, because she'd checked his math every year he was gone so he wouldn't have to do it alone when he came home. "She kept this going after," he said, quiet, mostly to the ledger itself. "After I stopped being sent anywhere to need checking on. She just kept it in case." He closed the cover gently, the way a man closes a door on a room he intends to come back into. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone you built this course?" Ainsworth asked, not as accusation, just as a question that had been waiting 39 years for an opening this wide. Curtis considered it the way he'd considered the rope walls, lean, unhurried, turning the answer over before setting it down. "Wasn't mine to brag on," he said. "I built a standard so the ones coming after wouldn't have to guess how far they could push a body before it broke. Man doesn't get credit for that. He gets to hope nobody has to use it and find out he was wrong." He looked toward the door, toward the field beyond it. "Twyla's the only one who ever asked to see the numbers, so she's the only one I ever showed them to." The 5 o'clock vote convened 19 minutes late, and by the time the board's chair called it to order, the room already knew, in the particular way rooms know things before anyone has said them aloud, that the agenda they'd been handed that morning was no longer the agenda they were going to vote on. Harrington asked to speak first, which surprised the chair, since firms bidding $2.3 million rarely volunteer to go first when going first means going against their own packet. He set the printed run sheet on the table, 41.03 seconds circled twice in pen, and beside it the carbon log certifying time, the two numbers close enough to make the coincidence its own kind of testimony. My recommendation was built on the course having no verifiable baseline, he said. It has one. It's had one since before I was born. My own equipment proved it before I understood what I was looking at, and I'd rather withdraw the simulator proposal myself than have this board find out in 6 months that I knew and said nothing. He didn't look at Curtis when he said it exactly, but he didn't look away either. I'd like to propose something else instead, a hybrid program. Sensor data where it helps, and Sergeant First Class Dabney's terrain method taught alongside it, properly credited, properly archived this time. He said Curtis's rank correctly. First try, the way a man says a word he has just learned matters. The board struck the demolition order before it struck anything else, a small mercy that took 4 minutes and no debate at all, and the northeast shed kept its shelves and its buzzing light a while longer, though not much longer, because within the month a work order came through to clean it, re-roof it, and give it a door that shut properly. Months later, on a morning cold enough to put a skin of frost on the rope wall, the shed stood reopened, its shelving replaced with something sturdier, one wall given over to a glass case that held, side by side, a canvas map roll with its leather tie retied for the last time, and a cloth-bound ledger whose spine had been carefully rebound rather than replaced. Beside them, small and unpolished on purpose, a brass plaque read simply, SSGT, Curtis Dabney, Corrigan Ridge Standard, 41 seconds, given so others could measure themselves against something true. Through the shed's new window, the course ran on the way courses do, indifferent to plaques, and a recruit not yet 20 came off the rope net at a dead run, reading a windsock nobody had told him to watch, veering 2 feet left at the wall the way a card long since retired in a drawer had once suggested a man might. Some records don't survive because they're filed. They survive because someone loved the man who wrote them enough to keep a copy of their own. The canvas roll sat where it had been set, undisturbed, at rest on its shelf, while beyond the window, the wind moved exactly as one old card had said it would, and the course went on being crossed by people who would never know the numbers by heart, only that someone once had made sure the numbers were true.